Alright, the Blade SR tail disassembly. I've done this 3 times before. Now, I don't exactly know if my technique or the way that I do it is the correct way. It's the way that makes sense to me. Alright, one of the first things you'll want to do, I've already done it, is you will need a soldering iron. And what you'll need to do is on the tail motor, you'll need to desolder or unsolder these wires, these motor wires off. I've already done that. It's just a matter of grabbing the wire, putting your soldering iron on, getting enough heat in there, pulling the wires right off. Right. The next thing you'll want to do is unplug the motor wire, and then there's a couple of techniques to taking this motor wire out. One is you can loosen on the frame here where the frame meets the tail boom. There's 4 Phillips head screws. You can loosen those screws. Actually, you don't even need to loosen them. You can actually pull the motor wire out gently by starting to pull it down, and underneath here is an oblong hole, and the motor wire should gently be pulled out. I don't like that technique, especially after a crash. If your tail boom is mangled, you can actually damage this motor wire by some of the metal on the tail boom itself. It can catch and basically cut this motor wire, and you'd have either exposed wire or even cut wire. Here's the method that I've been using to take the tail boom off. I've been taking these 4 screws right here where it meets the frame. I've been taking them completely out. Alright, once you have those 4 screws completely taken out, what you'll need to do, so I don't know if you can see it here, you can kind of, on the back of the frame, pull it apart slightly, and once you have it pulled apart, you can actually pull your tail boom out complete with wires. And then you have your wires removed from your tail boom. Now, like I was telling you earlier, the pulling technique, you'll notice I have some shrink wrap here, because in fact the last time my tail boom got mangled, I tried to pull it out and it got caught here, and my motor wires did in fact get spliced right here, which is why I use this technique now to take apart the tail boom. Just by pulling the whole tail boom out, when you have those 4 screws unscrewed, separating the back of the frame slightly to be able to pull that wire out. Because the wire doesn't go to the back of the tail boom, which would make it really easy to pull out. It comes out of this, the motor wires come out of this small oblong hole on the tail boom. Let me go ahead and pull these out. And there's your free motor wire. Again, if your tail boom is really mangled, has lots of bends, you'll want to try and straighten them out to get your motor wire out. And then obviously once you have your tail boom off, you can do this prior to or after. You know, you can unscrew your stabilizers off. If your tail boom is really mangled, you can take those screws completely off to take off your stabilizer. And then you have your rear motor assembly, the rotor. And to take this assembly off, on the rotor side there's an Allen set screw right over here. You would unscrew this, and your whole motor assembly will come off the tail boom. And then if you wanted to change your motor out, what you'd want to do is, you can actually change your motor out while it's on the tail boom. You don't necessarily have to take the whole tail boom off to change your motor out. You just have to unsolder those 2 motor wires. You'd have to take off your rotor assembly, which I'll show you how to do that. I like to do it with 2 Allen wrenches. Take 1 Allen wrench and put it in these set screws on this collar on the shaft. Hold that down as tight as you can. Take your other Allen wrench and unscrew the screw on it's holding down the rear rotor, the tail rotor. And there you can remove your tail rotor. You can also use a small pair of needle nose pliers to hold that in place. what'll happen is if you try to unscrew it and your set screw is really tight, it'll just keep spinning this, so you'll need to hold this in place. The next thing you'll want to do when you're replacing your motor is unscrew both of these set screws slightly, and this collar will come completely off. And the only thing left that's holding your motor in place are these two Phillips head screws. And then you should be able to pull your motor completely off, replace the motor, take this heatsink, clip it onto your new motor, or replacement motor, and there you have it. That's how you remove the tail assembly. Now, one of the things you'll want to note when you're putting your tail assembly back together, like I said, the way that I do it might not be the way that E-flite does it, but it's the way that makes sense to me, so you don't break any wires. I feed the wires through first, the oblong hole. And you know, again, that's my shrink tube for where the last time I bent the tail boom, it actually cut my wires. And then when I insert it back into the frame, you'll obviously want to separate the frame again to where that oblong hole that was in the tail boom meets the oblong hole in the bottom of the frame and your motor wires sticking out. And that's how I disassemble the tail boom. A couple more things to note. When you're putting your tail assembly back on, the set screw right here on the tail assembly, there's a hole at the end of this tail boom. What you'll want to do is take that set screw out till you line up this hole with the hole in the tail boom, and then put the set screw in. That'll ensure that your rear rotor is perfectly aligned and stays in place. So remember, that set screw will go into a hole in the tail boom. The next thing you'll want to note is, of course, when you're tightening this down, the rotor's tapered edge here goes towards where it's spinning. So this thing spins clockwise. That tapered edge will go towards where the rotor is spinning. Another thing to note, these motors, you can't really see it, but they'll have a negative sign and a positive sign for where you put these wires back on. And for those that are new to soldering, red is positive, black is negative. And then of course, just to solder it, use the blue Loctite or Loctite 242. Also note, all of these screws are metal into plastic. So you don't want to tighten them too much or you will strip the plastic.